I mean, first of all, it's crazy too because I'm glad that you got on the podcast. One, because like you're a dude, and I don't know if you noticed, but I actually don't have many dudes on the podcast yet, and it's because dudes are a lot of times scared to just have conversations, which is weird. Like I told my boy to come on, and he was like, "Yeah, man, first let me. I gotta do some research. I gotta do some background. So like, if you ask me a question, I'm like, bro, I'm just asking about your experience growing up, man. Like."
Yo, like, can we rehearse? Let's just rehearse. Let's practice a few times. All right, I'll be ready like in 2 weeks. Cool. Yeah. Can I do that over again? Dude. Can I do it over again? Yeah. Can you like Frankenstein edit my answer? Thank you.
All of that, man. I'm just like, bro, it's so weird because I feel like women are like, they tend to just be more vulnerable and just open to just having conversations, especially like, conversations about identity and all that kind of stuff where dudes are a little bit more hesitant. So I just want to say thank you for that, first of all, man.
Appreciate man. Of course, man. I'm always down to have great conversations and dialogue and stuff, It's therapy.
Yeah. It is. I mean, let's get into it then. Like, I always ask the same question to start off, man. When people tell you to be your most authentic self, or when you hear the word authenticity, what comes to mind for you?
I think it's just being most honest with yourself, right? I feel like sometimes, there's code switching, right? But I think it's just being yourself and being comfortable with yourself with no regrets. Because I think sometimes we tend to like have that inner voice and that doubt, like, oh, wait, how did I come off? And I think sometimes having just be straight up and not worrying about it, that sort of comes from the fear of not being liked or how people perceive. But I think if you're just true to yourself, I mean, that's like the best version. I say that now. I wasn't always like that. I think I've always been the type of person to be the pleaser. But what I've learned throughout the years is just like, just be yourself and that's it. Like you just got to be 100% real.
Tell me about that though. Like when you thought about yourself being the pleaser, like when was that? Was that really early on? Was that like last week?
No, that is it's funny because like as a Dominican man, I finally broke the therapy cherry, and so I literally started taking therapy. And I think it really just roots back to my having an immigrant dad that like didn't find things funny and was like very old school Dominican style where it's like not showing the emotions and just being like, so that being a sensitive dude, I'm a Cancer, Cancerians are very sensitive. And so it was sort of happy, right? And I think throughout the year I kept that. So it's like still throughout my years, it's the 7-year-old version of me where it's kind of like, and I think that sort of puts things in the muscle memory and the perspective of sort of just always trying to make people, happy. And sometimes that is sort of like, because I tend to be the type of person, like I could be a lot for people, like my energy. I come in the room and I'm working the room, and I've learned through time that, certain people, when I take a step back, it's like, okay, whoa, chill. Like, a lot of energy there. But as I've learned to know that I'm like that, it's probably just understanding that. Cause I'm sensitive. So I'm like, yo, why that person didn't like, yo, what happened? What's up? I knew shit. I had to grow and learn that. It's being that I'm sensitive, and then I have my 7-year-old version trying to please my dad.
That's really interesting, man. Because growing up for me, like you mentioned, like comedy and people laughing, like I didn't see that much emotion growing up as well. I didn't grow up with my dad, but my mom never saw her cry, never saw her emotion. And I feel like I kind of never actually spoken to her about it. But even when her dad died, like my grandfather, like no tear shed. And I feel like, I don't know if she did that for me to like show that like strong representation, but she's the type of person that in the most sad, awkward situations, she'll always crack a joke. And she'll be the person to like, I guess like calm the mood, if anything. But I think that's just her defense mechanism to not show emotion. Like she tries to lighten everyone else's mood.
Yeah, that's me too. That's sort of, I think, again, unpacking the coping mechanism of sort of like, you know, not being in the moment and being really in the emotions of things, crack a joke, you know, ha ha. But yeah, I think again, like throughout the years with my father, I think, you know, there came a certain point where he knew I was taking the career serious, and he was like, "Oh, Mr. Hollywood, oh, funny guy." But before that, it was always like, "Dad, what do I need to do to make you happy?" So it stuck with me. Like, you know, like I think one thing from therapy I learned is like sometimes if we don't get over that stage of what we were at, we were like 7, 8, 9, we carry it, we don't see it. And so like that to me, it took a while. And as of recent, like maybe a year ago, like where it's just like, yo, this is who I am. I understand how I come off, but like what, this is me. So take it or leave it.
Yeah. And that 100%, man, it's wild to think like how much little things or big things, like when we were younger, like we don't know how
Oh,
it impacts us now, man. It's crazy. I go to therapy as well, and I mean, I tell people all the time, like that shit saved my life, and I'm still going to it, man.
yeah,
Um,
man.
it's and it's interesting too, like you mentioned, like people not finding certain things funny, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you were younger, were you always just like that dude cracking jokes and everything? And then like how were you perceived like from your family? Where the people just like siempre relajando and all that kind of stuff?
Right. Well, I on my father's side, my cousin, shout outs to Jerry Diaz. On my father's side, he was like the family comedian, charlatan, making it, you know, you always saw it from him in there. Um, and I was sort of like observing, right? But on my mother's side, yes. And just growing up, I just think again, that was my coping mechanism. I'll never forget. I remember I think it was probably like 7th or 8th grade, and I got like a 3 out of 10 in like some pop quiz, and I needed my parents to sign for it. And my dad is coming in the kitchen. It's like in the morning, and they're like, "What? A 3 out of 10? What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Well, Dad, if this was baseball, we'd be hitting 300. That's pretty good, huh?" And he just, he was like, everything is a joke. You get an F, and you find something to make it funny, huh? That's the problem. You're not taking it serious. And I'm like, come on. So yeah, I think that was my thing from probably middle school. I was always the class clown. I was the crazy one trying to catch attention and everything. And I think that, you know, throughout the years, obviously, I've understand that it was high energy, you know, slapstick and stuff. But that's sort of my way that I was sort of getting the attention there of being with the funny one.
Yeah. And I'm sure I'm so curious like how you were received from your family though, because growing
Okay.
up, like I remember like the class clowns
Mm-hmm.
in the class, and like, you know, immigrant parents, like they have expectations of us, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
want us to be the doctors or the lawyers or all this type of shit. And then they see you like joking, potentially like not focusing as much on school, but they don't necessarily see your vision at the time. Maybe you didn't even
Right.
have a vision. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, what was that just for relationship
Well,
like,
so
man?
remember, there's a language barrier. So like to be funny in English and be the class clown and be comedy may not translate as much in Spanish. And when I growing up, my Spanish was really bad, right? Because the way it worked for me was my mom and dad spoke Spanish, but they watched American television. Like my mom, I joked around a lot where my mom learned English from soap operas. So she would like watch All My Children, One Day at a Time, General Hospital. And that was her, you know, learning in there. And so they didn't speak that much English to me. So then when I'm with my family, I just became real shy. Like I said, like even with my father's side, he's just spitting jokes, you know, he's being funny in Spanish. And then I'm like talking, like my cousin would say, like Indio Spanish, like, yo estoy aquí, ¿cómo está? Oh, and like I could barely communicate to be showing the comedic side. Now as an adult, I'll go to DR or I'll go in there and I have enough. And especially with the timing, I can crack the jokes. They know I'm funny, but it's very limited when it came to the language. And again, like my father just has a very dry sense of humor. Like I got, when I have that dry sense of humor, it comes from my dad. My dad had the poker face. he's the troll. So, and my mom was a storytelling, punchline in the end type of storytelling, comedic wise. So, being that with the language barrier and just again with my pops, it was kind of hard. Like it wasn't until I became an adult in my 20s where I come visit and I'm hanging out, where I'm having my parents bug out and hear me cracking jokes and stuff.
But at the time, like, how did they see sort of like who you were? Like, was it?
Yeah, I don't think, that comes down to them seeing the potential when there wasn't anyone on television. Like, if there's comedy, Dominican comedy, that's in Dominican Republic, obviously there. But here, they just thought that I was just, a funny child. It wasn't until I started creating my own content where they started seeing it. But even in the time I started, the industry is not where it was now. So it's like they saw it, but they didn't see me really take it serious, where it's like, oh, okay. I do talk to my mom once in a while. She's like, yo me recuerdo cuando tú estabas joven, que tú siempre estabas, but it didn't click at the time. Like it just looked at it more of like, this dude is always trying to crack jokes.
Nah, that's real, man. I mean, in so many ways, like you are the representation that at the time you kind of needed, you know what I mean? Or that you kind of wanted, even like when you were doing all those things growing up and, maturing into like who you were now, like, did you see people around that sort of you wanted to emulate, or people that you looked up to that looked like you in many ways?
I mean, the first time, I'll never forget the first time that I was like, oh shit, okay, was John Leguizamo on HBO. And I remember going to my friend's house and he popped in the VCR. I'm dating myself. And he's putting in one of his specials. And I was like, my mind I'm like glued to it. Like I was just watching his specials. And that was the first time. And that was already past my teens or even growing up. And I definitely know, especially, in the days of watching Fresh Prince and In Living Color, I just know that if I saw representation on television, it would have clicked, definitely, because I enjoyed watching comedy, but it wasn't until later on where I'm seeing John Leguizamo playing these characters that I'm like, yo, there's potential there. But I think that's why my generation right now, I think that's why we have that in common in comedy. Like we did not see ourselves. That's probably why now the generation right now and people that are starting off, they have that social media, they have television, they have all that to go and aspire to be. But for me, no, like there was just nobody. Not until John.
Bro, John Leguizamo was the first time that I saw a Broadway play. It was one of his many one-man shows.
Yeah. My
That's
first
funny,
Sexaholic.
I don't remember what the first one was, man.
It was my first one. I think it was 2000. Yeah, it was 2001 Sexaholic. And I was all the way in the nosebleed. And I felt like I was in the front row, bro. I was all the way like, and I'm like, how is this dude so far from me and yet felt like he was right in front of me, talking to me directly? Like I was just like, yo, that's like the characters he had. I was like, oh my God, that's my family. And so that to me was getting me to feel like, okay, we're being seen. But prior to that, no. And that I think that's why it's so important these days, representation and seeing people, breaking down the doors, because it might seem in the time where we're in the bubble of doing it, but when there's like 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 13-year-olds are seeing that and saying, okay, and it would have been so dope to be 13-year-old version of me and saying, oh yes, I'm doing that in school, I'm doing that with my friends. Oh, I would love to take it to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I always saw, like you said, like unattainable. And for me, it was something simple as like, yo, Broadway? Like, I don't want to see that shit. Like, not John, I'm just saying Broadway in general. Like for me, it was like, bro, that's not for us. You know what I mean? Right. And then, I've always worked in like in tech and for a lot of like, rich white people, let's face it. And like they go to Broadway plays all the time and they're talking about Cats and all these musicals. And I'm just like, that shit is corny, bro. And then I went to go see John and I was like, yo, there's a space for us. And like,
Yeah.
I actually loved it. And that actually got me into it. Not that I go see Broadway plays all the time,
Right.
but whenever he comes out with his one-man shows, like I'm there. And then
Yeah.
like, obviously you see more things like in the Heights and everything like Lin Manuel's doing. That's dope,
Yeah.
man.
I remember when I went to In the Heights, I was like, yo, and I agree. I think I think that's why it has such an impact on a lot of, and that's a prime example. Like there are a lot of that generation now. That In the Heights was 2007, and now it's 14 years. I guarantee you there's a lot of theater kids that are like inspired and are doing it because of 14 years ago when they were like 13. Now they're 27 and they're like in it because they went to see In the Heights and they saw the reflection. That's why no matter what you would consider success, it was a success. Because I interviewed him opening night on Broadway and I was like, yo, what do you consider success? And he's like, this right here, we did it. Like we are here. And that to me, he got it. Like he understood, because to break down the barrier to do that. And then he would have shows for kids, high schoolers. So it's like, you're bringing in that new generation that's like, yo, we could do this. And so I think that's important, especially when you think about how many actors come from theater. So if you can get Latinos to want to be in Broadway, that's just a gateway to be on television and film. So it's like a double impact, right? Because it's like, it leads you into going there. And it takes a Broadway play like a musical like In the Heights.
And the crazy part is that like when you think about impact, most people think about revenue, but the indirect impact, that shit isn't even counted. That shit's still happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
all
dope,
the high
man.
schools all the high schools that are doing it. Like it's.
Yeah. All right. So there you were watching John Leguizamo. And I'm sure like there were certain things like in between there and that moment where you were like, yo, that's who, now I have the validation almost in a way. Like if he can do it, maybe I can do it. And then you start producing your own content. Like tell me a little bit about like the emotions that you probably went through when you probably hit that like submit button on your first video potentially. Like were you nervous to put that stuff out?
Well, the first project that I ever did, funny enough, was a feature film. So I went to the film festival, the New York International Latino Film Festival. And I had a friend of mine that was like, yo, I'm friends with the founder. You should come. You're funny. You write a lot of stuff. Because at the time, there was a site called miente.com, and I was doing a lot of like short stories. And then like what is considered now memes, right? And I would do those things back in the day and just jokes and stuff. And I went and I was like, oh, okay. Because in my mind, I didn't even know there were short films, right? I'm just theater and television and cable, but I didn't know that there were people creating content short form. So when I saw that it was like short form, I was like, this is possible. Like I would just need to get a camera and, write something. So I remember I went and I started working on like 3 kind of treatments. And I had a friend of mine who his mother was the VP of BMI. So he was sort of in the industry. He was paralegal, but he was in the industry. And I was like, yo, I want to shoot something. And he was that guardian angel for me because he was the alpha. He was like, no, we're going to do it. I always remember when I used to do I used to switch it up a little bit, the script. He would have like binder with the scripts, with all the stuff. So he was not going to let me not shoot this feature film because it eventually became a feature. And going back in time now, that version of me had no fear. Like I didn't know, like I didn't care. Like I was just like, I'm going to do this. And it was until the film premiered at the film festival, it was sold out, 400 plus people. My family's there, friends were there. I was shitting bricks. But when, to the point where I didn't even see half of the film in the theater. I was just so nervous how it was going to get received, and hearing the laughter, and then in the end going on doing a little speech. That was the moment in time when I saw all that, like all the proudness of my family and my friends. Like, you did it, you completed it, you screened it, it's official. That was the moment I was like, this is it. Like, there's no turning back. I can't just be like, all right, knock that off that list there, I'm done. It was like I had to move forward. And so that was the moment where I felt it. And then after that, I started creating short form. I started the the Comedy Troupe Room 28, and we were doing the sketches. And I think that again, that was the Wild Wild West, right? That was like, YouTube was like a year old. That was 06, 07. And so like, I just didn't care. I didn't have fear. I just wanted to create. So I never had that moment that I was like, nervous to submit, but it was just more of the hunger of doing sketches that I found funny and being Latino and what we found funny as a group.
That's so interesting that your first feature film, you just like, fuck this, I'm fearless. But like, how did you get from the person that had the voices in his head, and we all have voices in our head, right, that tell us like, yo, maybe you shouldn't do this, like maybe you're too much, this and that. How did you get from that to just like, fuck it?
I again have to credit Chris Delgado, because when I told him about it, he is one of those type of individuals that's very zeroed in, and he just was not gonna take no for an answer. He kept me accountable. I've always said that in the past, like, if you're gonna work and you're gonna do something, make sure you have a circle of people that keep you accountable, that you can't look back. I mean, I was shooting this during the weekend. I shot this from April to like July, weekends and evenings till 2 a.m. sometimes, depending on the scene. Because I remember I had to do some elevator scenes and we had to just do a bunch of stuff. I didn't sleep. I got to a point, because the funny thing about it is, this is how crazy it was. I'm in Washington Heights. I'm in the Bridge Apartments. And this is where I was doing like casting places, but even Craigslist, I was doing it way back when, telling people and actresses to come to my apartment to do an audition. So you can imagine, you're like a SAG actor and you're like, comedy, where do I have to go audition? In Washington Heights on the 32nd floor? So kudos to all those actors, which, by the way, she's amazing. Michelle Buteau, she was in my film. And like, I give props to all these SAG actors that took the chance and came and worked on my projects just alone to audition. I had to flip my room, like the mattresses that I put them to the side, put a camcorder, set it up, and then get people in there, try to have an organ. I like literally turned my living room into a waiting area. Like, I was that determined to like make it professional, but then make it makeshift, right? Because it's not an office that I rented at a space or whatever. And I just think that it was just that hunger, because I have friends of mine, they were like, wait a minute, you really doing a movie? I'm like, yeah. Wait, you're not doing this so you can get like, numbers and shit? I'm like, no, I'm really doing this. And I had that friends, the friends of mine, they're like, nah. And I had to keep going. And I can tell you, I could do a serious film based of shooting that comedy, because it was just such craziness. I'll never forget, I had to, and this is where I knew, this was the true test of like knowing when people were down or not down. I had 2 train scenes. And so in order to do the train scene, we wanted to shoot it all the way in 207, the first stop on the A train. And we shot we started at 1 a.m. We shot all the way to JFK, and then went back from JFK all the way back to 207 to shoot all this stuff. And I had like 25, 30 extras. And the second time I had to do the scene again, I was like, yo, guys, we're doing the scene again on the train. Like 8 people showed up. They're like, nah, dogs. And I can't. That last time, 7 hours on the train. Like, it literally became to a point when then by the time we were on the way back, people were going to work. It was just such a crazy thing. But I was determined and so hungry to create this thing, because it was just a thing where it's like, I knew I couldn't let people down, that I asked for favors and we're doing all this stuff. Like, to me to be like, I'm giving up, So I think that being my first, I literally went 0 to 60. Like, I didn't go in between doing short film and sketches and right. No, I literally, my first project ever was a feature film.
That's dope, man. I've taken that ride before, but it's when I've been drunk and just fell asleep on the train. I've definitely ended up and I had to come right back. That's hilarious.
Yo, man. Hold on. What's up? Oh, I'm at You know what? I might as well just get a flight. Fuck it. Let me just get on the plane.
I'll just go to Miami, for the weekend.
Whatever. Yeah. So that sort of, I had that voice, but once I started doing the casting, once we started doing pre-production, once we started shooting, we just couldn't stop, and we had to do that. And that's sort of one of my strengths as far as when I'm working in groups, is like I'm the type of person that follows up, and I'll write a list and I'll follow up, because when you work with creatives, at times you can do the procrastination, and I've dealt with projects in the past that you start but you don't finish, and understandable, but that's sort of been my producer mind, that I'm like, nah, we finishing this, we're gonna get this, this is the deadline, we gotta do it. Because at the end of the day, if you start getting in a habit of not completing something or really slacking off, that's gonna be the way you're gonna be, and then people can't take you serious. Especially where I was a nobody or an unknown. If I half-assed it, the next time around, I'm like, yo, guys, I'm doing a project. They're like, yeah, I'm sorry. What happened to this other project? And you're like, ugh. So.
Yeah, it's like that reputation is so important. And you
Oh,
kind of,
man.
in many ways, you got like one shot to prove yourself.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, because I think that that's probably something that people have to understand. It's like, especially when it comes to meetings or following up, or when you agree to a task, when people know that if you say, yeah, I'm going to do it, they can rely on that. Oh my God, that has so much weight, because a lot of times moving forward, when you're like, hey, can you do this? Yeah, they'll know. A lot of times people won't even come to you because they're like, this dude, last time I asked him, he dropped the ball. It's not reliable. And I think that is such an important asset to have, is being reliable and knowing that they can count on you.
Yeah, 100%. I think something else that's interesting you mentioned is your boy. I don't remember his name, but you had someone on your side that really believed in not only you, but the story that you were trying to tell as well, right? But that's not always the case, right? Like, like you're in many times like pitching ideas. You have like these dope stories, and you yourself are talented. You know a lot of talented people, but if the people that are potentially funding it, or casting directors and all these other things, like they also have to believe in the idea as well, right? Like, what are some of those? Have you ever had some of those experiences?
I mean, we always have to understand that, like, when you're trying to pursue, or you're trying to get someone to work with you, or have like even a casting director, they have their own objectives, and so like throughout the years, I don't take it personal. Sometimes we have to articulate or pitch it, and that's a skill too. And I think that sometimes I've learned to not take it personal, but I think it's gotten easier as the year goes on. Like I sometimes think back and I'm like, someone like, yo, I'll work with you. And I'm like, damn, that easy? But it's like, no, Mike, you've done stuff for 10, 12, 13 years now. The body of work is there. But when you're starting off, you sort of have to continue to prove it, and you will get people that won't believe in it, but you just can't really take it personal, because again, people have their own bandwidth and they'll go for the short shot. And this industry is about risk too, right? I mean, there's a lot of times we see it's like, especially in sports, sometimes you see it like, yo, how come they didn't bank on it? I was like, yo, they were considered a risk, while this is the short shot, even though they may not be as dope, but to them, it's sort of like a risk in a sense,
Yeah, my bad. And it wasn't necessarily about like people believing in your ideas, right? Because like that's gonna happen, right? I mean, some people believe it, some people get it, some people don't. It's more so like, in many ways, the stories that you're telling sometimes are very specific to your experience as well, right? Like the Dominican stories, right? And
right.
Like the other day we were talking about like even the difficulty of even casting sometimes, right? Where like some directors do a really good job, like vampires versus the Bronx, for example. Like that, I felt seen in that story. And throughout the entire movie, like you can tell somebody Dominican was shooting that, because like from what people were wearing to how they were talking, from like fulano and all these like Dominicanisms were in the movie, right? But it takes a certain team to be like, no, it shouldn't be like that. It should be like this, right? Like
yes. And I've had so I've had experiences like that, and it's tough, because you're sort of trying to keep it really authentic. And I think that sometimes people don't see that, and it's so hard, especially like I said, like you see that in that movie, it was so important to shoot it in the projects, to shoot the casting, everything to be authentic because the audience sees it that way. And I've had those moments where you have to, I mean, when I did Puerto Ricans versus Dominicans, like even down to the mofongo, they were going crazy in the comments. And it's like, it's so funny because the reason why I switched the mofongo and that was literally because we were on set and it was getting warm. And I was, shout out to Rachel Strauss Muniz, because she was on set, she was pregnant, and I had to get her off set. So we're like, all right, let's go to her. Just give me the mofongo. Give me the mofongo. Yeah, cool. Like, we're just thinking time-wise. And then it wasn't until post, and then we put it up, and then people are like, oh, and I'm like, and I like to troll, so I like to go in the comment section. They're like, oh, mofongo is not, it's not Dominican, it's Puerto Rican. And I'm like, yeah, I know. We had to do the, I'm like explaining it because sometimes people don't care. They don't know the backstory. But again, even with that, people call it out. And I think that sometimes people don't see how the audience takes it. And you really have to put your foot down as much as possible because like social media they will call you out, yo. They will definitely call you out with the authenticity and being Dominican or just being Latino and being real to that.
Yeah. Do you think I'm assuming it's easier if like there are Dominicans in the room, right? Or easier if there are Latinos in the room, right? I mean, the same way if like a woman is trying to tell her story and it's just a bunch of dudes, the dudes aren't going to get it, right? Like, have you found that to be easier? Is that sort of like what's missing in many ways?
Yo, I think that people may not notice it or may not see it, but it's happening in advertising. It's happening in a lot of things where there's more and more Dominicans and Latinos in those rooms saying, nah, you can't. I mean, we've seen throughout the last few years where it's like, yo, how does this even get out? Like, how did this even become a commercial? Like, who's in those rooms? So it is getting better because even when you're dealing with brands, having someone that's in that brand team or in the production team, even if it's an intern or somebody of an associate producer, now that we're having more Dominicans and Latinos that are in those positions, they'll be the ones that be like, yo, because if it's just the talent and the talent's too busy and it's like, you could only have so much say at times, but it's really the ones that are in those back rooms or they're on set or even in the boardroom saying, look, and I think it is getting better and better and better as we start to populate more of those rooms and those spaces.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. I definitely see it in advertising on my end. Like I have it's wild because I've been pitching like the Hispanic audience and Latinos for years to like some of my clients, and they're just like, yeah, we're not going to prioritize that this year. We're going to do that next year or whatever. And all of a sudden, just with like all of the protests that was happening last year with George Floyd, there's like a new emphasis on just like quote unquote diversity. You know what I mean? And it's so interesting is like when the pressure is put on brands, now they want to spend money and invest in all that stuff. So yeah, man, it's dope. It's dope. I'm excited to see all this stuff coming up.
Yeah. And it's like right now, shout outs to Distorted. She's this artist and she's working with Topps and they're doing like Dominican baseball cards, and she just came out one with Pedro Martinez, but it's like you gotta see it, and it's like that's dope. Topps got it. They got someone like her, but then she's putting the flavor and the art with the Dominican culture, and it's like, yo, that is like and I'm seeing that a lot lately where it's like, okay, even with the sneakers, with Nike and them doing that stuff with the sneakers. So I think it's just so cool because when you do that and we feel seen in that aspect, it's just amazing and it's tenfold. I mean, even when Bad Bunny was on SNL with Keenan last year with the Dominican thing, like people resonate with that, like especially with Dominicans. So again, I say that we're going in the right space because people are filling up those spaces and really putting input in it.
Yeah, I just saw Distorted. That should look fire. It kind of looked like a Venom in Pedro Martinez, but he's a Cyclops too.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I started following her and she is like, she's dope. But then it's like And then like I didn't follow because of the Topps card, but then I'm like, yo, you're doing this. I'm like, yo, I can't wait when you do the Mets. Who are you gonna? Because I'm not, Red Sox. I'm a Pedro fan, but I'm not a Red Sox fan. So, but when I saw that, I was like, yo, I can't wait when the Mets get their player, the Dominican player, to be featured. That would be dope.
Yeah. That's so dope, man. It's so interesting too. Like, you like a lot of the content that you produce is like these Dominican things that are just like part of the culture as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you've had like an interesting relationship with just being Dominican as well, right? Like,
yeah,
growing up in Connecticut, then like
mm-hmm.
visiting family in New York and all that. Like, what was that experience like? Have you always felt comfortable just like
no, the opposite. That was sort of my challenge. That being, my dad was in construction, and we always joked around that like my dad was antisocial, so he decided to move from Stamford, Connecticut to West Reading, Connecticut, near Danbury, because he wanted to make sure that when my grandma was like, yo, because she used to just show up uninvited, like, hola, I'm here, oh, what's going on? And I feel like my dad's, oh, you know what? We're going to move farther away. So he did it where it was like an hour and 40 minutes. So any relative that wanted to come to visit, they had to announce themselves like, yo, we're coming over next week. You know what I mean? So in saying all of that, I grew up in a town that was like, I was the only Latino. And so it was such, I talked to my siblings a lot because they went through it too. But for them, it was a little bit more different. But for me, and like, again, this was the time there were no Dominicans. Like, I would be like, I'm Dominican. And I was like, what part of Puerto Rico is that from? It's like, it was completely not known one bit. So
and that's in the East Coast.
Yeah. And then on top of that, like, I remember I would go to CCD class, church class, whatever you want to say. They thought I was mulatto. They didn't even think I was Latino. They thought I was half black, half white. And I'm like, I'm Diaz. Last name is Diaz. Like, what are you talking about? But I laugh now. And the humor, I can make fun of it now. But going through it was really tough for identity because, blue eye, blonde hair, every nationality, but I'm here Dominican, and it was kind of a thing. And then when I go to the weekend to New York to visit, I'm the gringo. So it's like, I'm getting the gringo, oh, mire, no habla inglés, habla español. So I'm like getting the worst of each side because I'm like, I'm the gringo. And then it's like, who's this kid bringing leftover Spanish food? What the hell is that? And so I'm like getting picked on. And so I think it took till when I'm doing comedy where my identity sort of got flipped. And so that sort of has been a muscle of mine now that I'm able to really storytell, because I'm always thinking of like the audience that is not taking for granted or knows as a fact of what being a Dominican is. So I'm sort of doing it in a way where it's educating at the same time, but in a palette where everybody, like when I did Puerto Rican versus Dominican, like white people were like, oh my God, I just learned so much from your video. I'm like, I didn't even know. And I'm like, okay, but that was part of my growing up explaining my Dominican culture, and then visiting Washington Heights and like taking that in of the culture of like, wow, because I wasn't living in it. So when I moved to Washington Heights, creating and stuff was a time, that's why I wanted to do my first film in Washington Heights. I really wanted to emphasize the Dominican culture, but that was part of that identity thing where I felt I never fit in either one. And it made it even difficult, like I was saying before, I didn't speak that much Spanish, so it was even worse. All my aunts were like, no me hablen inglés, háblame en español. I'm like, yo. So yeah, so it was tough. It was very, very tough. And luckily the therapy has been creating the content.
Bro, I still go through that shit, man. I was born in New York, grew up in New York. But I mean, yeah, I could speak Spanish, but the Spanish that I speak is like the most basic conversations, because it's like with my grandma, and it's like, abuela, what'd you make for dinner? I'm gonna go visit you. How are you?
Right.
It's not like we're talking about politics or like, yo, you saw the Yankee game last. You know what I mean?
Right. But so, it's funny. Yeah. But it's funny you mentioned that with your grandmother. My grandma, my mom's mom, like gangster. She got her license in DR at 78, bro. Like she was gangster. Yeah, she was 78. When she retired, went back to DR. They live in Santiago. And when my grandma first moved there, she got her driver's license and started driving at 78. So I say that in saying that she was the one she would talk English. She'd be like, me, how you doing? Like she would bug out. So at least it was her. But all my aunts and everybody else, no way. But my grandma, at least, it was funny because people, I don't know if you're aware, but people in Spanish is a curse. And people, like, ay, people. And my grandma will always joke around. I'm like, abuela, ¿qué tú dijiste? No, yo digo gente en inglés. I'm like, oh, okay. But she was clever like that. I feel like I got some of my sense of humor from her. But it was so funny. She was the only one that made me feel comfortable because she was trying to learn and she just had that spirit. Like she didn't care. But everybody else, forget it, yo. It was just like, mira este, yo. Tú eres dominicano, ¿qué te pasa contigo? I'm like, damn.
Yeah.
Bad, man. I ain't
Bro, I go through that, man, at so many levels. I even I was actually talking to my therapist about this too. Like my girlfriend right now is white, and for so long, I actually told her this. I was like, I've been trying to not like you for so long because in my head, I've envisioned myself with a Latina for so long, and I really like. It's so weird because this is fucking random, but that's what podcasts are. It's funny, like we like many people make fun of women because they say that they imagine this wedding, right, and this like grand thing, and they dream about these things. Yo, dudes dream about the woman that they're gonna end up with in many ways. They don't think about the wedding, but like I've always had this idea of what like a Dominican man is supposed to look like and supposed to have by his side, kind of thing. And I never imagined myself dating a white woman. Like it feels so weird, and like. It even feels weird being like having a podcast where I'm empowering people to be themselves. And I look back and I'm like, yo, am I a fraud? Legit, man. Yo, not even that, but I even think about like, even culturally, like what if I were to have children, right? Like, am I going to be Dominican enough for my children, right? Because now I don't have a Dominican woman is like, and it's weird because when I was talking to my therapist, I used the word burden. I was like, I'm gonna have to carry that burden in teaching them. But I was like, oh my God, wait, no, it's not a burden. It's just
yeah, dude, that's deep. Because
it's a lot of pressure, man.
I'm the only one. My fiance is Dominican, but my siblings, Italian, Europe, Italian,
like fiancés or girlfriends or whatever.
No. So my fiance, she's Dominican, but my siblings, they're all white. Like my two sisters dating, my sister's married a Russian. So it's interesting that you're saying that, and it's funny because when you're talking about having kids and stuff like that, we have that voice, but we have those relatives that be like, mira, no come mango, ¿qué te pasa? No, our Dominican culture, what's going on? And that to me is crazy.
It's the nationalistic mindset almost. You know what I mean?
So fascinating because. Being that, Dominicans came here in the 70s and 80s, we're in that part of that generation where it's still, infused in there. But then, it's just natural as time goes on. I remember, dude, I was on set like a year and a half ago, I think. It blew, I was on set. I will never forget this. And this dude was like, yeah, right, whatever. And I said something in Dominican slang. Right? Like, vaina, coño, something. And the dude was like, wait, what? And I'm like, yo, wait a minute. What nationality is that? I'm Dominican. And I'm like, you're Dominican? I'm saying coño, but it was something so basic that a Dominican would know. And he was like, no, he was like 2021. But I'm like, yo, I was like, oh shit. But that's just natural. Like, it's gonna happen. We're gonna get to a point that eventually it's just, but it blew my mind. I'm like, yo, how you not know like coño?
Here you were being your aunt.
Yeah. I was like, yo, it was crazy. But I'm like, yo, he's 20. He's probably third generation. You know what I mean? Like his
I didn't think about that. Like third generation? That's weird to say.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's crazy. And I'm starting to meet more and more third generation where they're like mid-20s and like their parents were born here. And like, it's a stand-up comedian that I know. And I didn't even know he was because like, all right. So like, there's a lot of Dominican comedians that right away from the first joke, they're Dominican. This comedian was like, da, da, da. And then he's like, yeah. And then my grandfather's like, mira. And I'm like, oh shit, he's Dominican. Like, it took like 8 minutes to his set where he was like, and I was like, you know what? That's cool. That's cool. Cause sometimes as comedians, we can have the habit of overcompensating the jokes of we're Dominican, but guess what? You alienate everybody else. And then it's like, okay, you're funny, but can you be in the broadness and perform anywhere? And so sometimes when you have, especially in the Latin space, some jokes are so niche that it's like, it's going to nail it because it's like, you throw it in, and then she said, coño, and you're like, But if you're a white person, like, or any other culture, you'd be like, I didn't get that, right? So in some ways, the adapting of being third generation is sort of a plus in a way because it's like you got that card that you could throw in that you're Dominican, but you're still using the humor that's general to showcase that your overall comedy, skills in that sense. I don't know if I make sense, but I'm just talking it out as far as like noticing that. And it's just, so my point is, yes, I became my aunt on set when I heard this kid. He didn't know. And I'm like, oh man, he's only 20. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Forgiven.
But you know what, man? I think what you're doing, though, is important because going back, like the way that we learn about a lot of these things is through the media, right?
Yeah.
And like in many ways, like you're educating people, even white people, right? Back to your reference about like what Dominican culture is. And going back to even like your earlier like in many ways, I think you became who you needed at that time. Just like what John was for you, like you are to so many people nowadays.
Yeah, man. But again, it's, the evolution, like a lot of times when you think Dominican and you think comedy, it's all DR. I mean, it's still happening now. They have the features and stuff like that. Yo, dude, a friend of mine gave me tickets to like the United Palace. This was like, I'm going to say like 9 years ago. And he's 3,500. The United Palace fits 3,500 people. And my friend's like, yo, I got a ticket. Come through. It's sold out. So there. So I'm just chilling, and I'm standing there on the side. Yo, the feeling that I had, the 3,500 people are dying laughing, and I'm there like, oh wait, that was I don't get it. I'm so lost. Think about that. There was 3,500 Dominicans in there dying laughing of the punchline, and I was like, I'm lost. What happened? And it just had me thinking that it's like, again, the culture, especially Dominicans, like we have such a distinct comedy that there's the Dominican comedy in DR, and then there's here. And so even that, where it's like, who do you look up to? Well, if it's that style and it's like I'm Americanized, that Dominican comedy, which is storytelling, little word play, and then the punchline comes in the end and it's like, boom. And it's like, but dude, I feel like an alien amongst 3,500 people and they're all losing it. And I'm like, all right, I gotta go. I didn't, what's going on with me here? And it's like, yo, that's the humor. So it's so interesting when you say reflecting that, because that's sort of the second generation. It's almost like we know it, we see it, right? But we like a lot of the Dominicans too, we can't speak it, but we can hear it, we understand it, and we see it from observation. So I think that a lot of times then when you do see the performers, that's where you even get more of the connection. So
yeah, that's really interesting. This whole concept of just like even beyond first generation is just mind blowing. It's such a simple concept. It's just like you have babies, then they have babies, and I'm just like, yo, it's kind of crazy. Yeah. I bet as we're wrapping up, man, we could so many things I could ask you about as well, man. But as we wrap up, like, what's one thing that continues to inspire you and empower you to be your most authentic self?
Right now is the way the industry is changing and how we need to fill up the space as producers and showrunners and executive producers and behind the camera. So I'm catching a second wind now as far as really getting to the point of being authentic the way I am, because how we were talking about second generation, there are a lot of individuals that need to see the representation in front of the camera, but they also need that person behind it that can vouch and say, no, that's how it is. So I'm catching a second wind right now in my career as far as like really striving to be out there and really keeping things as authentic as possible, especially being Latino, in the simple fact that we're so complicated with so many nuances and slangs amongst all Colombian, Dominican, Puerto Rican, that you really need to have that authenticity behind the scene to really correct it, making sure that the audience really can say, yes, that's who we are, and we're being seen from the other side.